This is the Ike and Tina Turner origin story, the real story about how Tina Turner got her start with Ike Turner, making music history as a duo.
How did you and Ike get together?
Well, it's so amazing. I never knew about the record industry at all, or like the shows. I never knew that people cut a record, and the same person that you heard on the radio was out like on stage and all. So I went to hear Ike Turner one night. This is like the beginning was Ike Turner and the Kings of Rhythm.
This was his group?
Yeah.
Yeah. What year was this about?
This was like 57. I'm sorry, 57.
Ike and Tina was more sisters and brothers than husband and wife.
Because she was real young when you met her. How young?
She was, 16?
16.
Yeah. And they put out of the clubs in St. Louis where I was working in St. Louis because they said she was too young.
And I went, and so I've always sang. So I says, oh, I sure would like to sing with that group. So what made me ask Ike was there was a girl going to the same school I was going to, and she said, she started singing with him. So I says, oh, I can beat her singing. I must get on the stage. So I always asked Ike if I could sing. He always say, okay, I'm going to call you. He never did.
But don't be confused. It took 4 long years before Ike became romantically interested in Tina. Now, Ike had early success with his music, and when Tina met Ike, she writes in her book how, as a band leader, Ike never touched drugs or alcohol. He didn't even smoke. And I would say he should have stuck with that. For a book that's entitled Ike, Tina, it's really more about Ike. Barely mentioning the father of her first child, Raymond Hill. Tina is doing a lot of tap dancing. Raymond does have his little short 5 lines in the book, but he's barely mentioned. But Ike was living that high roller lifestyle in the 50s before the drugs ever crept into his life, but always into the nightlife and the party scene. And Tina volunteered to hang out, taking a front row seat to all of the action. Go back to that page from her own book. The executive that actually signed Tina and Ike, Henry Juggy Murray, wrote this, and it is in Tina's book. This is Juggy's account. I said, because they don't know. Ike was a musical genius, but he wouldn't know a hit if it fell off the Empire State Building and hit him on the head. So I flew down to St. Louis, never been there before. He sent his driver to pick me up at the airport in his long black Cadillac and take me to his house. East St. Louis was a hell of a town, had gambling 24 hours a day, and they bet down there like they bet in Vegas. I'm serious. Ike bet $1,000 in a minute. He was the hottest thing in that area. He hadn't had a hit, but he wasn't poor. He was sharp. He was clean, had Cadillacs and pretty blonde white girls worshiping his tail all that he wanted. That's where I met this Anna Mae Bullock. She was around. Actually, she was wherever Ike wanted her to be, along with his other 40 women. Ike thought he was the hot shot, but I blew his mind, went down there with a contract, and I said, I want to sign him. He looked me over and thought, who is this little N-word? Juggy Murray signed up Ike and his song for a $25,000 advance. Doesn't that nightlife that Ike was living sound crazier than the movie? At least it gives you another view of what was going on, because Ike and the women was a constant thing. This was always going on. This was never hidden. And Ike was sexually promiscuous at a very young age, before he was a teenager, and he was introduced to his sexuality in not a cool way, and that's an understatement. The man has enough flaws without people stretching the truth about him. But maybe Tina and her management team counted Ike out of the game because he was so lost in his substance abuse. The man was...
Like, how bad were you into cocaine?
Oh, I was terrible, man. Terrible. Best thing happened to me was when I went to jail, man. And so that's when I got my life back together. I can gladly say now, man, that I've been clean now, man, for 5 years, a little over 5 years.
It took him a long time before he found his rock bottom. But to give y'all perspective as to how clueless people and celebrities were in the 60s and 70s about the dangers of addiction, listen to supermodel Beverly Johnson, who was bold enough to tell you the truth.
This is the magazine cover that changed the face of fashion. A young woman named Beverly Johnson, who became the first black model ever featured on the cover of Vogue in 1974.
You did drugs before that?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Well, we came up in the 60s, and I remember trying to not get my mother to try a little marijuana, but we were kids, we were experimenting, and then when we came to New York and then New York City, and that was the decade of a lot of excess, and particularly cocaine, because what cocaine did was, first of all, it wasn't addictive. It wasn't back then they said it wasn't addictive. They said that it increased your intelligence, it kills your appetite, it makes your eyes nice and white. It's an elitist drug. It costs a lot of money. You have all these beautiful little crystal bottles and paraphernalia to do it with. And so, for the modeling industry, that was like, hey, the secret sauce.
See, this was the atmosphere for a lot of stars, a lot of celebrities, not just Ike. Tina was honest enough to admit that Ike wasn't doing any drugs or alcohol and drinking when she first met him. And the man was a workaholic. Ike Turner was already regularly on radio and TV as a successful band leader, talent scout, or A&R man with a huge following in the Midwest. See him here. This is a very old recording. This is 52 or 53. So Ike is about 19, 20, 21 years old maximum. Tina would be 12 years or so at this time, still living on the plantation, according to her memoir. But Tina doesn't really talk about her upbringing in any real depth. And I know it wouldn't be easy for me to write a book about my pain. She reveals little more about her young life than feeling unloved, abandoned, and left on the plantation to pick cotton with her father. Now, and Tina stayed angry about this. So we know a lot went down with the elementary school age Anna Mae, who didn't enjoy the cotton picking. I mean, what child would? It couldn't have been easy for her parents. Somehow she says that her father was well off as a sharecropper. Well, I actually never heard of anyone describe sharecropping as lucrative. This was just like an extension of slavery. It was another way to reconstruct slavery. It was just reorganized slavery in servitude, like an indentured servant. And that's what happens with these sharecroppers. That's probably why he ran off. This generation of entertainers like B.B. King, James Brown, Little Richard, these men and women, they went through a lot traveling through America. All of our parents and grandparents, they went through a lot. But you can imagine a musician traveling through towns, traveling on these lonely highways when things weren't as developed. There was a lot of land that you just driving in darkness, looking for some lodging. They went through a lot traveling through America, and they all have stories. Tina doesn't talk about it so much, but if any time B.B. King or James Brown, any of these men, they start talking about really their beginnings, Little Richard, all of them, they seen a lot, they went through a lot, and they are products of their environment. The behavior has so much to do with their experiences. God rest their souls. This is our music history. We got to respect the sacrifice and respect the truth that these people came out of some harsh environments. It's not an excuse, but everybody was harsh. Tina was not a snowflake. She came from some harsh stuff. She just does not elaborate on it. Tina doesn't like to say that she was poor, but she does describe her family often struggling. Let's just consider that Tina was young. Maybe Tina felt her options weren't good during that time. See, little 16-year-old Anna Mae got to hanging out in the club, then hanging out at Ike's house. She's not 16 in this picture, but she started hanging out at the house, dating Ike's sax player, who was also his housemate and his bestie. Still in school, Tina starts doing background vocals, has her first child with Ike's sax player, Raymond Hill, later moves into Ike's house. Years later, has a kind of affair with Ike and becomes pregnant with her second child. First child being Raymond Hill's, second child being Ike's. During Tina's second pregnancy with Ike is when she does her first lead vocals on a recording, in that order. After 4 years, she has still not quite yet become Tina Turner. She's still Little Ann. And all this is going on while Ike still has his live-in, long-term, live-in woman, Lorraine, who is also having children for him. And I don't think Ike purposely threw things in Lorraine or Tina's face, but Tina definitely knew what was Ike. The way Ike ran, it was a little tricky how a lot of women were wanting to be Ike's side chick, and a lot of women were Ike's side chicks, because Ike was known for being generous with the ladies, generous with the gifts, and he was a high roller and a lot of fun. He's a party man. Ike loved throwing parties. He loved taking people shopping. He loved showing people a good time. He loved doing it. He loved playing Big Papa. And Ike had it going on. So Tina took a risk and make something happen and start a career with Ike Turner. A lot of people take risks in their youth. Some people, especially teenagers, are prone to do reckless things to get their shot, and they don't see it as reckless. They don't see it as reckless. That's the thing about being young. You look at things in retrospect and you go, whoa, I was doing that. Well, you don't even know you're young when you're that young. You think you grown. You know, these teenagers think they grown. Tina decided to take a risk. Tina was 16 years old, underage, and not permitted to be in the clubs where alcohol was being served. And not only that, you have to think Tina was not the Tina that we know. She was Anna Mae Bullock. From Tina's own account, she was very skinny, underfed. Everyone was overlooking her. She looked like a child as far as they were concerned. And just to describe the risk that Tina was taking, this was an environment that was not welcoming to Tina. You saw in the clip earlier in this video, I mentioned how Tina was getting kicked out of the clubs. And not only was she getting kicked out of the clubs because she was underage, she was also getting knocked upside the head by her mother, who also didn't want her in the clubs. Not to mention that Ike Turner had a main live-in woman, and all of his bandmates had many women, but Tina still insisted on being in this environment, and it was an uphill battle for her. So you got to give it to her that she made something out of that. I do mention the drugs, even though we're talking about how Ike and Tina got together and there were no drugs. But this is the first thing that people think about, the drugs and the violence, when they think about Tina's relationship with Ike. And the drugs was actually the last thing. But the wild, toxic environment with the wild women, Ike womanizing, all of the pistols, all that nightlife, that was always going on from the first time Tina met Ike. And all you have to do is go back to the account that I read from Tina's own book and see how true this was. But again, this book of Tina's came out in 1985. I'm sure they were writing the script around 1983 or 1984. This idea of the book must have came up, and there was no reason for anyone to predict that Tina would have this over the top, over the moon success, which she had. You got to give it to her. But now when you go back and look at that book, and definitely we look at the movie, and when you do have Ike's book to compare it to, you see that things are not as they seem. And these are rock and roll Hall of Famers. There are a lot of teachable moments from their life story, but we should know the truth. Everybody paid a price for the risk that they took. Ike took risk with drugs. Tina took a risk. I'll leave links for all the books in the description. Tina, That's My Life, Tina, and Taking Back My Name. And I'll be getting a small commission if you decide to purchase any of these. A lot happened that following year after 1960. We will have to talk about our musical family some more at another time. Nothing changes the fact that Tina is the queen. Tina, this woman, timeless, ageless, she defied the odds. She is another product of her environment. She beat the odds. She's so amazing. I get a touch. I just want, especially women, we need to know the truth. Let me just wrap it up right there. And if you need some soul, go on and get some. And then you'll know where I'm coming from. Until then, y'all keep living your life like it's golden. Thank you so much for joining me. Y'all be good. Peace.